This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. As always, my name is Alex Perny, and today we are very pleased to welcome on Daniel Nikic with Coras. And we are going to be diving into a topic today that I know everyone's heard about. I mean, if you watch the news or have any type of keeping up with the world policy in your personal life, you've definitely run across AI. Machine learning and the roles of AI tools in almost any parts of our life are, here to stay. They're getting better by the day. They are learning. They are being implemented in many more facets of our day-to-day life. And one of those key points is investment strategy and planning and analysis. But from the perspective of kind of understanding those things, and we've had a few different guests on here with different AI platforms and tools and dug into how those things kind of work and operate within their general spheres, but taking a bit more of a broad approach to kind of how these things are filtering into the financial sectors of all of our lives is something that I think is very important for all of us to understand. It is an inherently complex segment of the market to kind of dig into and really understand, but basically learning that these things are coming into the marketplace and what we kind of need to know at present to maybe integrate them, or at least just things to know and educate yourself on is going to be of paramount importance, right? We all, strive to be educated investors in any segment of our investment stack, and understanding how AI and machine learning is going to integrate with those strategies is extremely important. So Daniel, really appreciate you taking your time out of your day from all the way over in Croatia today to be with us and talk to our listeners. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of background about yourself and kind of how you came to be in the world of AI and machine learning.
Well, first of all, thanks, Alex, for having me. I think it all starts in Canada because I'm born and raised in Canada near Toronto, and I've always had a curiosity for data and also research. For example, I was really into hockey, basketball, and also soccer, or in other words, if you're outside of North America, football, depending. And I would always look at statistics, or where did a player play before, and etc. And in doing that, I studied accounting and international business at Brock University in St. Catharines. And once I finished university, I moved to Croatia because my parents are from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And for those who don't know, there's a small ethnic minority in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which are Croats. And when I came to Croatia, I worked in management consulting, in which I did comparative analysis and to see how companies can be more efficient. Then I went to real estate, dealing with data, financial modeling, and research for projects, which include shopping centers, office centers, and also logistics for a company called HB Reavis. And then I opened my own company. And when I opened my own company, I wanted to have it in relation to research. And that's how I came up with the name Coras, which stands for Coherent Research. And moreover, it was a .com domain. So that kind of had an influence. And I've always, with my customers, I worked with investors, I worked with entrepreneurs, early stage companies, and well-established companies. I always had to deal with data. It didn't matter if it was dealing with financial analysis or market research. And when dealing with data, I learned more and more the importance of it, as we see with a lot of companies. Hence, Jeff Bezos said, data is the new oil. And that was said, I think, over a decade ago, if not more. And in relation to that, I dealt with a lot of companies that were developing their own internal AI tool. And what would they need is someone to, let's just say, clean up or audit the data. And I did that quite a lot for investors and even companies. And I noticed with data, you can do a lot to build a successful AI model, but also to give yourself the right insights in making strategic decisions.
Awesome. Yeah, it's always interesting to kind of learn, especially in newer emerging industries, kind of where people get their genesis story from, right? Further, I also find it interesting that, at least from a geographical standpoint, just how many different, data analytical companies and AI companies are coming from the Balkans and the Baltics. With regard to just geographical locations of some of these companies and people coming out with these different tools and platforms. So again, really interesting from a few different perspectives. The geography nerd in me always likes to see where things are actually happening in the world, and awesome that you're taking this this company through what you're doing over in Croatia. So just a few things, right? So you have your background in data analysis, right? And again, I wholeheartedly agree with the fact that data in general is going to be kind of the next big boom, because we've had so many different companies develop kind of out of the ether, right? But being able to take and scrape all of the data that's out there to find the different nuggets and different small aspects of efficiencies or value is really important, because as we mature in a technological sense, that the new aha moment ideas are going to become fewer and fewer, just because there are so many ideas out there and there's only so many utilizations that people can have for some of those ideas. So being able to find the value in the margins and really be able to kind of extract all the value from the data and the markets that we're operating in, I think is really going to be key, going into the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years, right? So from the perspective of, coming from that data analytical background, when did you really first start getting, into the AI space? Like, what were some of the first few projects that you really kind of worked on and took a crack at in that space?
No, great question. So I'll be very open. I wasn't really a tech guy. Like I had a BlackBerry a few years ago, and it's not because I'm a Canadian. It's because I liked it, and it was good cybersecurity, and I really didn't care about like the other features of a phone. It's just I could type, see my emails, and etc. And in reference to that, I first heard about got into AI when I was working with a company called Search, it's a startup, and it was focused on emerging marketplaces. And we were developing our own, let's just say ChatGPT, and this is back in like 2016. And I was the one who had to deal with the data. So I had to do the nice grunt work, but I liked it. So it wasn't a problem. And from there, I realized how much of a process it is. And it's very costly. So for those who think that OpenAI ChatGPT came like just during 2020, no, it was a long time coming. It wasn't built in a year or two. And then I worked for a few funds. One was called Prado Capital, where I did, I would say, global research on tech hubs, and I could kind of see the AI popping up, even like in countries like Algeria, Israel, but it wasn't commercialized yet in 2016. And then I worked for a fund called Asfin Capital Partners, and they were AI focused fund. And I did the pretty much did the research, led the research team, and I was a associate, senior associate, and then promoted to a principal. And I analyzed about 7,000 to 8,000 AI companies. That's where I saw AI. And I saw in machine learning, imagery, acoustics, voice, sensory, and etc. And I worked with great individuals, entrepreneurs who have global experience and who looked at AI not just as a widget, but how to make it into a company. Because a lot of AI products look like a widget. For those who don't know, a widget, like part of a product or service. And they would look at certain things. It would be, does it have a patent? And also, is it going to be a business? And for those who are asking why a patent's important, think of it this way. If you have a patent, you're giving value to your company in worst case scenario if you have zero revenue. Because a big company is going to need that patent to use it, or they're going to have to pay you a fee, a royalty fee, to use the technology that's included in that patent. And when I was looking into these AI companies, I'll be very open. A lot of these companies weren't really AI. They just say they're AI, but it's pretty much algebra that we learned in high school or in university, depending on what someone takes in school. And also, a lot of them were taking other companies' AI and just rebranding it in a way.
Kind of just like a massive white labeling like marketplace, right?
Exactly. And I think that's okay because you can't have all the same language models or the same AI products. And I think if each company builds their own one, it's too costly. It's not a good business. And we see with how much OpenAI had to invest. Well, yeah, it was a nonprofit organization, well, still is, but it had to invest so much money into it to be able to develop their own ChatGPT. So it's very costly, but when looking overall, AI companies, they usually tend to collect data and they use that data to continue to train it. So if an individual is thinking, oh, I'll just build an AI product, you have to train it. And for example, I've talked to companies that deal with in the automobile sector. They have to have 50 million data points to show that if you're dealing with a car that's not going to have a driver, that's a tree. That's not easy to do.
Hmm.
So a lot of AI models are trained by data, and you have to make sure the data is good. So it goes back to basic research. What's your sources? Is it credible? And is the data being trained in a way, or in other words, is the data being broken down and categorized for the AI model to clearly understand it to give you the right results?
Yeah, and I think that's really important for people to understand is that I think a lot of people, when they look at AI, they kind of think about this amorphous blob of data that exists in the world, right? Like anything's out there that you want to be there. But the problems are kind of a fewfold. One, like getting your actual data set, verifying the inputs. Like the AI models, as a general high level, the outputs are only as good as the inputs, which is kind of true of anything in business or anything in life in general, right? If you put bad data, incomplete data, unverifiable data, the ultimate result's going to be something that is representative of what you kind of put in there. And, just saying, hey, like, we have all this information at our fingertips. Well, getting that data to a point where you can actually have a model trained on it and do that training is, I think, kind of where a lot of the secret sauce comes into play. And then also being able to get those data inputs, just like you said with self-driving cars. I'm glad you brought that up because cars are something near and dear to my heart. I have a brother-in-law that's a driveline engineer for GM. I've been in the car business with my family for a long time. I personally like to build and I love cars, right? If it's got pistons, two wheels, four wheels, I love it. But looking at kind of like the new points, like you mentioned, like it needs what do you say, 15 million data points to tell that that's a tree or something. Was it 15
Yeah,
million or yeah?
that's what one individual told me.
Yeah, so you need that many data points to figure out it's a tree. Okay, well, how do you get those data points, right? Okay, well, you need to have something that collects that data. Well, then you need to have you need to have the, hardware built out with maybe a driver in to go out and collect this data. Well, you don't just want one driver, you need multiple. You need to expand those data sets and get those inputs coming into something that you can, realistically say, okay, here's the outliers, here's the commonalities. Let's build this bell curve and kind of see, do everything to figure out, okay, that's a tree. Now let's do it for a pedestrian. Now let's do it for a road code. Like all these different sets of data. So, I kind of, expand on that a little bit. One, because you mentioned cars, I get excited. But when you come back into kind of what you're focusing on, those expansive data sets, I'd assume, are kind of one of the the issues with people coming in and not just white labeling an AI that's going to maybe give you 45, 50, 60% of the expected outcome, right?
No, I definitely agree. And I would say, I would take an example, Elon Musk. When he bought Twitter, or now X, a lot of people were, why is he paying that much for X and Twitter? Think about it. Look how much data he has from Twitter. He could use it to train AI models for Tesla, also for he could use it for his company SpaceX and etc. So you have to really get as much data as possible, and there's a lot of data out there. You just have to formulate it in a way that's understandable, legible, and as I always say, so that a 9-year-old can understand it. And I think a lot of times when people are building something or passionate about their business, it goes back to basic communication. So this is somewhat communication. Keep it simple. Keep it simple, don't complicate it.
The KISS method, keep it simple, stupid, right?
Yep.
So, and again, I think you bring up a great point, especially about, the value in X. I mean, you can make, we could, people sit there and opine, till, ad nauseum about, why he wanted to buy it of, political, but again, we stay apolitical on this. But again, the amount of like consumer data that you have there of being able to figure out, okay, on, Tuesday afternoons, more people are tweeting, engaging responses to X, Y, or Z, then we can sell that data to marketers, or we can tailor things to say, okay, we need to do, X amount of ad spend on Tesla on September 3rd to the 23rd during these timelines because we've seen an uptick in purchases on the back end as it relates to this data set. Like there's so much interesting stuff you can do with that data. Again, people say what you want to about capitalism and, constantly being sold things, but you know, that's what some of these places are looking at, and inherently what some of the value in at least that acquisition, if not in a small part, probably my guess being a large part, based upon. So when you're looking at coming back into kind of the financial sector, I think, by virtue of the fact that, everyone thinks of, the financial markets as just a big data pot, right? I mean, we even see movies to this effect where the mathematician from MIT is the guy that, cracks the code, or is, the guy that always kind of like figures out, hey, like we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, or, you kind of see that, portrayed through, whether that's, any outlet, you kind of always see like that, at the end of that kind of nerdy data aspect to finance. So I think it's only natural that, AI kind of really, focuses in on the financial markets because there is just so much granular data that's produced on a like millisecond by millisecond basis with markets across the entire planet, right? So, from your perspective, kind of how did you or how are you operating into the financial space with machine learning tools?
So in terms of machine learning tools in relation to financial markets, I've noticed that a lot of financial institutions stuff, they're using the big AI companies such as Perplexity and ChatGPT, and what they're looking for is not market research, I would say value research. So
Mm-hmm.
that is what's the insights, what's the takeaway. So I've used Perplexity, I've used Cloud, and etc. And usually a lot of these big companies, they're have their own AI models. They're not going to share their data in open, which is fair because privacy and etc. And what I've noticed dealing with machine learning for these financial institutions is pretty much what's the takeaway? We have all this data, so this goes back to these AI models. They're not going to take over all human jobs because they don't have that experience and expertise yet. But the insights of this information is what makes a difference for these companies to make good strategic decisions, if that makes sense what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of two things to that point. I mean, yeah, and I really wish I'd remembered where I've, seen this, but it was a military analogy about integrating AI into different aspects of military operations, where you can give something a data set to say, hey, look, this fighter jet sees a threat. It is X, Y, and Z. It's focusing in on that, but it takes the pilot's gray matter to say, okay, well, I have additional inputs in the context of this situation, like the things that can actually come out of this outweigh, the risk of doing it, not necessarily focusing in on, that single data point of like threat reduction, elimination, that kind of thing. Where again, to the financial markets as well, is that okay, you need to have a model that can not only say, okay, does this trade, this acquisition, does this thing that I'm about to do, create value return, but in the broader context, if it's saying, okay, I'm looking at that, well, if I'm buying this, is it going to, royally screw over or anger other investors in a competing market, right? Some of that periphery or that ancillary, cause and effect that takes so much more of a context, right? Like the human that had the investor call with a, and then talk to a board member afterwards, and saying, hey, look, we're thinking about doing this, and then an AI model goes out and does something that's antithetical to some, again, kind of high level conversations that are going on is a real concern, right? So again, I think that people's concerns on this forefront, need to be tempered, I think, is a good expectation, but also understanding how these things work and why certain industries aren't just kind of full bore taking over stuff, because there is inherently absolutely a value to the human interaction and the human component to to some of these different markets.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, so now specifically kind of to what, you're doing right now. What are some of the interactions that you're having you know, I guess in broad context, with the AI community? Like what market segments are you really kind of focusing in on right now that you're helping and integrating with development for these kind of tools?
I would say the VC sector, investment sector. I would also say insurance.
Oh,
Mark
okay.
insurance, they use it a lot because they need the data to make for claims and stuff. And I've used it also for, like I said previously, financial sector. Health sector can be used for patient care and etc. If you're going to have like train a bot or something, or say customer service product. So those are the main ones where I see it. And obviously we see it for cybersecurity, but I'm not really in the cybersecurity sector because there's a lot of other factors into it.
So some real like like stalwart industries, if you will, like insurance. Again, I could see that being a huge tool because right now relying on actuarial data analysis is a kind of the bread and butter of insurance companies, right? It's like what's the expected outcome of this versus what the known quantity of income and premiums is. What's the delta between that? Is it plus or minus? And that's basically how insurance companies have run in memoriam, right? They've, always kind of been based on that model. And again, love it or hate it, living here in the state of Florida in the United States, we have a little bit more of a, let's just say, aggressive take on insurance here with all of our natural disasters and hurricanes, which uh, someone brings up insurance makes me see red a little bit. But anyways, it's certain industries I think we can all kind of see that AI, especially from a job threat perspective, could be certainly a valid concern, right? The act a big pool of actuaries being able to be just the the algebra people being pushed out by AI tools, I think again is maybe a little bit of an easier concept to understand. The ones that maybe are a little bit harder to kind of place that risk profile for the jobs market, again being the the healthcare industry. Again, still need a doctor to sit there and look at someone, right? We're not going to get the Danger Will Robinson robots coming in just yet, but the VC markets I find to be interesting. So I'd like to dig into that, and especially with what we do here at Advanta IRA and where a lot of our clients invest is into startup companies, emerging markets, private stock. So it's a topic kind of near and dear to a lot of our investors' hearts. And a few things that I find kind of tough to pin down on that is that with broader financial markets, you look at the New York Stock Exchange, you have a ton of data between the for any of the financial products. Again, huge data driven industry. Insurance, it's basically all data, right? There isn't too much else to insurance except for spreadsheets and data. But when you're talking about VC, right, there is that inherent unknown, which makes it attractive, right? I don't know if this is going to do well, so I'm going to invest and hopefully get a, an X multiple return on my investment, not just a percentage return, right? Getting to see a 1, 2, 3, 10X on your money is the attractiveness of the VC world to be the first to strike, be the first to market. So with that said, there's a lot of, kind of unknown. So, what are some ways that you're seeing at least the VC world really try to integrate those AI learning models when you have, by kind of design, an incomplete data set?
Okay. So I'm gonna describe the VC model, how I view it based on my experience,
Mhm.
and discussing how they use the data sets.
Sure.
For many people, VC is very risky because it's kind of like betting. Some funds invest in 50 companies hoping that three are home run, using a baseball analogy. They sometimes look for companies to invest in, or some they're like, whoever pitches to us, we'll go with the best one. I worked with investors who would seek companies. And I like that approach because it's kind of like the Moneyball approach. For those who don't know, it's kind of the baseball method that was used with the Oakland A's. And I think it's sometimes good to seek instead of, because those companies who are doing really well, they usually aren't going to go out of their way to look for investment. They know they're going to come to them in some ways, or they're going to go through someone that they know, get me connected to this person. You already have a connection, perfect. And I've built databases for VC funds. I've built one that had over 7,000 companies, filtered it out based on their investment criteria, etc. And we were developing an AI model with this data. And a lot of it's incomplete because some of them, they just take secondary sources and go by it. Luckily enough, I have experience working in primary research. For those who don't know what primary research is doing the research yourself, not asking Bob or Alicia to do it for you and then using it. No, you gotta go contact the people and try to go do face-to-face or focus groups. And I would use secondary sources and then track it down. If it means checking out the company's website, who got funding or the funds, or even looking at news articles, or even sometimes contacting the company directly. Be like, hey, I know you guys got recent funding. I work for a fund. I'm just curious, what was your funding round? Just so we know in case you're in our investment range for follow-up investment, or who knows, maybe for co-investment if you want to do a Series A Part 2, for example. And when dealing with VCs, they have to really be careful about who they invest in. Yes, a lot of it's gambling, but they have an obligation to their investors. So it's a domino effect, and their investors are LPs. And for those who don't know, it could be pension funds, it could be banks, mutual funds, or family offices, or high net worth individuals, or even corporations. So say if you're part of the New York Police Fund, maybe you're indirectly a shareholder in a few of these VC funds. So you never know, right? So I think VCs have to look into data still, and a lot of them have their own AI models. I know this, like for those who I even tried to work with, they're like, hey, Daniel, I like what you do, but we have someone to build a database, but we can use you for your insight work and etc. Therefore, in my opinion, you have to make sure the data is right, but you also have to do it based, if you have a VC fund, how they look at companies, how they value companies, because they're not going to have 50 million data points that isn't necessary for them to make an investment decision. Because the AI model isn't going to look into the qualitative aspects in investment. So what I mean by qualitative, do you think the team can manage stress? What are your thoughts on the management? Do you think they can take criticism? Do you think you can work with them? If you're going to be, for example, a VC fund that looks looking for preferred shares. So for those who don't know, if a VC fund has preferred shares, they have voting rights, and they can sometimes kick out the CEO, or say if there's a liquidation process, that they get their monies first before the company. And those are all things to take into consideration that AI model and data still can't not look into.
Yeah, it's the examination between qualitative and quantitative decision making, right? So
Exactly.
going back to the example of the military, it's like, yeah, you can identify things, and that's really kind of key, especially looking at very high impact decision making. Whether it's military, which again is very high binary kind of decision making, or again into things like finance, which can have very high impact decision making of where these AI tools land in the stack, right? And I think that's important for people to understand too, is kind of where these are actually being used and what they're being used for. Again, like data analysis is something that all these different places do. Whether it was being done by different programs and now into AI, what human touch. But really, the jump from the qualitative analysis or the quantitative analysis into the qualitative decision making on that data set still is primarily based in the human the human touch, right? Because AI models again can hallucinate, which I find a kind of a funny you know term being used in this is that you have to verify what it's giving out to you so you can make an ultimate decision. And rarely are these things just turned over to say, hey, do everything, run the business, and then just click buy, right? So where do you kind of see that transition coming? Is it, for the foreseeable future, mainly just a quantitative analysis tool for then in turn the people to make decisions on the answers and outcomes that are being produced by these machine learning tools? Or do we see some, industries really leaning heavy on the qualitative, just like, hey, it made a decision and we're going to run with it? Like, what kind of checks and balances and where are those different, use cases being implemented?
Okay, I would break it down into three sections. First, the stage of AI that we're in. I think we're still in an AI stage that's augmented. For those who don't know, that still needs human interaction to make the AI system work. And second of all, I would say it's based on human bias. So I could develop a AI model. You can develop an AI model too. For example, you can make it look like Florida is the best place to live. I can say, no, Ontario is the best place to live based on my data that I can manipulate and stuff. So it
Yep.
goes back what your sources are. You have to audit your AI data and audit your AI tool. Because just like everything, everyone makes mistakes. No one's perfect. And technology makes mistakes. How many times have you worked with an Excel sheet or Word document and you're like, oh, it made a mistake and then you have to fix it? I've been there plenty of
Right.
times. And do I think it will make qualitative decisions? Not yet, but it also depends how a company wants to train it. I don't think that's a good idea. In my opinion, I think AI models should be dealing with data, not making the full decision because we could see it in terms of military, we could see it in terms of healthcare, cybersecurity, and etc. Let's just take example healthcare. You have a machine data and it takes all the data points from a blood test and it says what the symptoms are, a little checklist or whatever, right? And you get an x-ray. If we make an AI model make that decision compared to a doctor or surgeon who has human experience and has expertise, I rather go with the human experience and expertise. Why? Because they have empathy and which AI models don't have. We're still not at the iRobot stage from the Will Smith movie back in 2007. So that's where I think I wouldn't use qualitative. And I think a lot of these AI models, they're just based on data still that's just giving like answers. I think we'll get there with time, but not right now because it's not, how can I say, it's not the AI that we think that's gonna be able to think for itself. It still needs human interaction. But when we go to qualitative decision making, where we let the full AI model take over, it's still gonna have human bias. That's
Because
one thing.
humans built it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
it's yeah.
And it was interesting. I had a podcast a few months ago, and the interviewer asked me, he's like, do you think AIs will develop their own feelings? So they learn like, oh, it's not nice to be rude. Will they go like kind of act like humans to be like, no, I don't want to work with it or I won't be as receptive. So there's plenty of things we have to take into consideration if we're going to like do qualitative because you can use the AI model to make decisions, but it could be like fire all these employees. But it's not going to take into consideration, well, these employees have children, or they have a partner, or they have a huge health issues, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Will it have that human empathy that makes us unique, despite
Yeah.
what people might say in today's world? We're still humans.
Yeah, exactly. But just in case, I'm always nice to the AI chatbots that I use. Just in case Skynet does happen, I'd like to be the person that was nice to ChatGPT or Grok or one of these. Just be nice. I don't know. It's free insurance, right? Just be nice to these things. Uh, but coming back into the realm of less hyperbole on that, is that at least and I'd like to get your thoughts on this too. And we've seen this a lot with, a multitude of different industries with regard to different technologies or things that happen is that we will see a rapid adoption of artificial intelligence and machine learning to a point where there has to be some type of like correction and pullback to a best use case scenario. Take for example an easy one's customer service, right? We saw throughout the early 2000s a mass offshoring of customer service, and again, some were better, some were worse. But now we see a big selling point of companies to say, hey, look, we have top customer service, or we have domestically based customer service, right? And not to say offshoring a call center, you can have a perfectly fine one, right? But when it's just dollar cost averaging, some of these places are like, look, we don't care. It still makes sense. Even after all these customer complaints, we'll do it. But again, it turns into a selling point. Or from the example of the resurgence of things like vinyl records, for an example, like you'll see a push towards one thing, but then you'll see a resurgence back to a little bit more of a mean, like a balancing point, right? So I think we're kind of in that initial run up of a mass adoption, and then we'll kind of see the pullback to an equilibrium of how the stuff actually can be effectively implemented, and again, taking into account things like human empathy, human bias, because again, those playing back into this whole conversation being based on data, those are data points, those are things that it's going to figure out, and then we're going to be able to take that data from what has actually happened, when we actually use this, and the data created from the actual utilization implementation avenues of this, to be able to say, okay, here's how these tools can be effectively used within any different market segment.
I think that when dealing with a lot of these AI tools, we have to know, and these companies using it, and what you said about outsourcing and stuff, we have to take into consideration not every company needs AI. And I think some companies are just investing in AI because they're fear of missing out. And another thing I would say is, at the end of the day, every company is looking at a P&L. Sorry, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be realistic. Like, they have these public companies, yes, they have values. I do agree. But when push comes to shove, are they going to put that values as a priority if they're at a loss? Highly doubtful. I know that seems harsh to say, but it's a reality. And I think companies, if they can still have their profits, if they're still growing, they don't care if it's bad service or whatever, as long as they're growing and making. That's what happens at the end of the day. And we've seen it with a lot of large companies with the products they release and the complaints. It's not much of an upgrade. And I think you know which companies I'm thinking about, but I won't say it out loud because you never know what will happen in the future. And I've dealt with companies that outsource and stuff like that. A lot of times they say, yeah, it's a good selling point, but they also say, I prefer to work with them because based on my cash flow, it's easier for me. So I can make other decisions to invest it in R&D. So we also have to take that into consideration, because if you're not constantly innovating, you're done. We like it or not. And in my opinion, I think you should only invest in AI if you think you're going to use it, and if you know how to use it and why you want to use it. If you just want to invest in it just for the sake of it, it's pointless. Because why would you invest in something if you don't know why you're using it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a pretty basic understanding of any business operation, whether again it be insurance, medical, or just your small business that you're operating. Like, understand the end goal of the equation, and then kind of work backwards from there to say, hey, do you think that this is going to be something that is a net positive, or at least something that will drive future revenues? And I think that, again, we're, to your point, again, we're still kind of in the phase of everyone thinking, hey, we need to get on this, and it's going to drive a lot of eyeballs and investment towards AI, which I think in general will be a good thing that kind of gets us to a more stable and readily utilized market, with different platforms being able to white label a little bit better. Because to your point, a lot of people are developing their own, because again, everything's so segmented. What you need specifically might not necessarily be best suited to just an LLM, right? You might need something that's a little bit more tailored to what you're doing, and maybe it's a little bit more data analytical focus, just, ones and zeros and numbers. Sometimes it might be a hybrid that's something that needs to take into account, a large LLM and combining it with some of those more quantitative, data analysis models of just spitting out a number, right? So from the aspect of eyes on it and investment dollars, I think that's probably a good thing. Now, kind of going towards the future, right? Do you see the kind of general investment side of things coming mainly from the top down, the middle forward, or like where do you see the majority of the dollars being spent? Is it from outside sources developing their own, or is it from large AI companies such as your OpenAIs, your Geminis, your Groks, different places? Is it, where do most of the capital dollars kind of injecting into development of these things coming from?
It's coming from the outside, I think, because these AI companies, they're pretty much operating at a loss to begin with, because it just takes such a long time to develop these AI models. And we might not notice, but there's a lot of partnership. Like Microsoft invested so much into OpenAI, and we
Hmm.
knew with Elon Musk, and Grok is part of Elon Musk's, and et cetera, and et cetera. And these big corporations are probably like, I don't know how to use it yet, but I'll invest in companies that are making waves in it to make our bets safe. So we're not left in the desert, let's just say, which isn't a bad strategic decision to be open, because you might not know how to use it, but you might invest in a big player that you think might help you in the near future. So it could be a company that's, say you're in the automobile industry. Yeah, you could use machine learning, stuff like that. But if you want to use a bit robotics or imagery, you might be like, this company is not there yet, but I think they will be in 5, 10 years. I don't want to waste build it in-house. I'll just be let's just say investor in this company. If it works well, we can work with them in the future and we save ourselves a headache.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And then to that point, you mentioned as well, again, just bring up, automobiles, and it kind of brings up the data security side of thing, which we really haven't talked about, right? Plugging in large data sets. I saw a funny meme the other day. It was, so it's like uploading 10 gigabytes of client confidential information to ChatGPT to write a 2-minute email. The guy was just giving a thumbs up. It's what does the data security side of this look like? Because again, you have to, plug in your data, right, to these things. So I think a real and very valid concern is if you're going to be, again, investing is one thing, but implementation being another thing. Do you see the investment coinciding with the utilization to make these things better? Because just dollars being plugged into something doesn't help it, kind of matriculate into something you can use if you have a highly specialized data set or maybe a confidential data set as well. So from the perspective of dollars and implementation to also data security, where are you seeing those kind of market drivers push?
No, good question. And I've dealt with a lot of companies that deal with AI, and some of them may not develop their own, but they might be like, hey, we'll give you a closed model, because a lot of these AI are open source, so the data is out there. And therefore, you might want to, and cybersecurity is huge. So there's a big opportunity for cybersecurity companies, and we see it everywhere. And if you can't ensure the data is safe, you're in big problems. And I don't think a lot of individuals realize who are starting companies that deal with lock-in information or data. You have to make sure your data is safe. If
Hmm.
not, you lose your reputation. It's done. No one's going to trust you. And I think a lot of companies that are investing into AI, they also have to take into consideration the cybersecurity aspect too. So it goes side by side. As much as you can build a great model and stuff, you also have to check, okay, let's see at the cybersecurity factors. And I've been there and I've seen it. It's like, oh, we got to do this, we got to do this. And it delays it another month or two.
Yeah, and I would say too, if you're looking from a pure investment standpoint, right? I think all the eyes are on, hey, investing again outside dollars into the AI marketplace, saying, okay, let's, this company's developing this model and that model. I think kind of maybe not as highlighted industry is the cybersecurity realm that focuses on data security for AI companies, right? Because I doubt that many of these places are developing the security tools in house. I mean, they might be depending on the size of the company. Probably bring it in house, but for the smaller developers that are focusing on their actual uh, tool or model, right? It's you're going to have to outsource that just from a cost perspective. And looking at the companies that are developing good and robust tools in the data security and the cybersecurity marketplace, I think is where like the ancillary boom is going to be. Like you look at the oil boom in the United States at the turn of the 20th century, you see also a precipitous rise in the value and the size of railroads, right? Railroads, run on coal, but you got to ship oil between different places, right? So you see this big boom, and then you see this other thing that is, directly correlated to this one other industry becoming a massive industry. Just take a look. You think of the Rockefellers, but you wouldn't have the Vanderbilts if it wasn't for the Rockefellers' oil. And you can kind of extrapolate that to other things, right? I mean, the example I'd use in tech would be you wouldn't have AI if it wasn't for kind of the Larry Ellison and the Oracle database analysis that was built out in the 70s and 80s for the CIA, right? Like you have these things that are kind of precursors to other big booms in industry, which is where I would kind of see, maybe a little bit of an easier analysis because there's so much unknown in the AI space. But I'd like to get your thoughts on what you think some like ancillary industries around the AI space would be to look for when people are looking to say, hey, look, where can I place my dollars? And, and again, adjacent things that are probably going to be like pulled up by this AI boom.
Well, before I jump to that, you made me think of one thing, and you said like companies that are industries that are connected, like AI, cybersecurity. So one thing that goes back to VCs, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them have portfolio companies. So they usually don't invest in competitors. So if they invest in that AI company that's developing its language model, they probably have a cybersecurity company that they are investors, and they make them work together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing to take into consideration when you made a reference to Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. The industries that I think that will be important for AI are quite a few. I think it's going to be mental health. Why mental health? I think people are going to want to live in a virtual world with this AI, and we saw somewhat related to metaverse and stuff that isn't going to be realistic. And they're going to have a dopamine. And then when they go back to reality, like, oh, it's kind of like SimCity, or why did people like playing video games like GTA and stuff? Because
Oh, yeah.
you can take over the world, for example. I think that energy, definitely, when it comes to AI,
Mm-hmm.
data. I would also say other industries, but it's not too much related to AI, but I think will always be important is obviously that water, agriculture, health, the necessities that will always keep on growing, especially more with technology. And one industry that will have to grow because it takes a lot of money to invest is finance. And believe it or not, I think the mining industry.
Okay.
A lot of natural resources go into building these electric vehicles that are going to be autonomous and these robots and etc. So it takes a lot of chemicals to build these things.
Yeah,
They got to
absolutely.
come from somewhere.
Exactly. And, if you've, I have a lot of friends that are in the geoscience space. You want to talk about some people that are maybe the unsung data nerds, talk to a geoscientist, right? Of just looking at like soil samples and geological reports and all those things. Like those people are in the data space. And again, I wholeheartedly agree that there's some things that people may not necessarily think about, especially agriculture. And an interesting example again to bring it back to things that people can understand a little bit better, weather as well as it relates to weather analysis and patterns and things like that being something that you can look to an implementation that might drive value in other market segments, right? Whether that is, agriculture, big here in Florida, things like, which again will affect other things that, have investment, but looking at specifically that, especially for insurance. But an interesting example, right, of where AI has really started to kind of, maybe clip is that a few years ago you had some large AI weather pattern models come into the fold. Right, you had especially for hurricane tracking. There's one out of Europe, the Euro AI Fast. There's one that NOAA utilizes, and I think I can't remember the other one that happens, but there's about three main ones right now. And there's two competing hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin. Looking back to last Wednesday or Thursday, all of the traditional model runs had it coming up the coast of Florida and then kicking into South Carolina, Georgia, right there. There were basically two outliers, and both of them were AI models that had it kicking directly west when it kind of came up to the top of Florida and then kicking over towards Bermuda. 24 hours later, every single other model was in consensus from the traditional models to those two AI models, which also an interesting thing is going to run it right into another hurricane, which is an anomalous event in and of itself that'll be fun to watch for any weather nerds out there. But it's, again, interesting to see how, a few years ago, these models were kind of the ugly ducklings. You always would laugh at these like squirrely paths that you would see for storms coming out of the AI models. And now it was a 24-hour predictor of a agreed change in a weather pattern model, which is absolutely wild to see that was that early of a predictor of a consensus for a weather model, because that is, again, almost an impossible thing to pin down, but they got it right. And again, we'll see if it actually makes a turn. But again, seeing how these things can be implemented and what market segments they're going to be, I think, is almost an equally important thing for people to look at, as opposed to just saying, hey, if I want to put my dollars and cents behind AI, not just investing in the AI company. There's going to be a huge periphery of things that can be affected and values driven up and potentially values driven down, depending on which stack of the market you want to invest in. If you want to bet on the downside or the upside, you're going to see things that AI will directly affect in both directions on the value proposition. So again, I would probably lead into the kind of closing questions for you of saying, from your perspective right now, right, what are some of the things that you are most concerned about and most excited about in the next year when it comes to AI?
Ooh, I think privacy. I think that's one thing people are having a big issue with in terms of AI. They feel like they're being tracked, kind of like the movie V for Vendetta
Oh yeah,
or
great movie.
1984. Uh, so I think there's big issues in terms of that. People feel like they won't be able to do, they'll be controlled and stuff. And that's one concern. Health. I think people, like we see with technology in general, human population is less healthy. Versus, I think that's going to be an issue. That's concerns that I have. And I think human relationships, I think it's definitely going to change. We hear about there's going to be robots where people can marry AI robots and stuff. I think humanity is going to change dramatically if this goes and becomes successful, in my opinion. Those are quite concerns, but times
Look,
change. At the end of the day, you can't stop the trend unless, I'll be honest, unless you have a lot of capital, you can maybe make somewhat of influence. Without capital, you can't make big change on how society's going. That's my
yeah.
honest opinion. And those are some concerns, but there could be some good benefits. I think a lot of jobs are going to be lost, and we see what's happening, but they're going to create new jobs. Though I hopefully it will change the entrepreneurship too. I think more people are going to create companies. I think entrepreneurship is going to be growing more, and I think corporations are not going to have such as many employees.
Yeah, I think those are definitely some things to look
So
at,
there's
and
some change
especially
there.
from the utilization. Like, if you think you might be in a job that is, going to be on the chopping block in the next few years, time to start educating yourself, right? Or investing so that way you can make money for a change in this. Because again, it's just like we've seen with a lot of industries that have changed things. It's not an overnight thing, but it's coming fast. And there are unfortunate growing pains that come with new industries and things that make certain jobs redundant. So again, just something you got to be careful for. There's going to be plenty of opportunity, but plenty of downside as well. So just try to be educated, prepared, and make effective and informed decisions. So Daniel, really appreciate you being on with us today. I always love getting to talk to people about new and emerging markets and how things work, so that way people can take a more broad scope of looking at their investment portfolios. So if people are interested in learning more about what you have going on, connecting with you individually, what's the best way that they can reach out?
They can check out my website at www.danielnikic.com. So DANIELNIKIC.com. Or they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I got a pretty unique name, so it's not hard to find. But thanks again for having me, Alex. It was great talking to you.
Absolutely, Daniel. Thank you so much for your time. This has been another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. My name is Alex Perny, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you for tuning in to the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of the Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.